Okay, we're back. Move over here. Getting settled in. Coming back to ESO for a little bit today. Kind of revisiting. There are two additional accounts. Actually, these were my primary and secondary accounts for years, and then eventually I started a third account just to kind of reinvigorate the process, I guess. Do something new and re-get achievements and that kind of thing. So we're back on my primary actually today, and I wanted to hop in here just to we've got account-wide achievements now with update 33, which requires logging in with everybody. So that's not particularly riveting gameplay here, but I'm going to hop in with everybody real quick just to grab those. But ultimately, kind of take a look at what I've got over here for builds, because I haven't played over here for a bit, and just see what, if anything, needs updating. I know the DK, I'm running a different setup. It's actually more of a traditional setup over on my third account, the one that I'm playing most actively right now. And so if nothing else, I might go through and rebuild the existing setup that I have over here. I'm not even sure what I'm running on this DK, to be honest. I know nobody over here, character-wise, you can see essentially as my primary account. This is before the armory. So what I had done, I'm assuming this is probably similar to others, is basically create alts for... so I would essentially have a tank, a mag damage dealer, and a stam damage dealer. So health, stamina, magicka for each of the classes. And in fact, I've even got them, I drug them around so they'd be organized that way. So these aren't in the original order that I created them, but they just happen to be grouped up. So I've got the DKs here, I've got the looks like damage, appears to be damage, and then my tank. So in this case I have stam, mag, and tank, I guess it looks like. I think. I don't know, it's been a while since I've been over here. So we'll take a look as we log in, and I'll kind of poke around on the existing builds and see if anything needs any updates or something fun that I might want to tackle. But I know the DK tank specifically, I've switched back to very old school set for the secondary set for my primary DK on the other account, which I've thoroughly enjoyed in terms of being able to tank with it, lots of resources and stuff. So, but yeah, let's just run through these and see what we got as far as builds. For anyone who might have missed the previous videos, I did a brief introduction, kind of an about me in terms of ESO experience on some of the previous videos. But just to recap, I started ESO originally in the beta, played the beta, and played for the first month. I think was free at the time as a result of playing the beta. I played through that. I was tied up with very actively involved with Skyrim at the time, so it's comparing the two, it didn't have the same feel. So my initial impressions were, okay, this is fun, but it's not something that I want to pay a subscription for right now. So I opted out after the first month, and then once they went free to play, I came back, and at that point, I kind of got hooked in. So I've been playing ever since their first year when they introduced consoles and went free to play, steadily, pretty much. Tapered off this last year just because there's been less content, less dramatic changes that have come out, so not a lot changing, thus there's not a lot to invigorate gameplay for people that have been in here for quite a while. To the point where this is actually my primary account. This is actually my master crafter here, but it's to the point where I actually dropped plus even on these accounts just because I wasn't playing them enough to justify. So needless to say, I won't be picking up any materials or things on the ground because I don't have a crafting bag. So let's see, this guy is running Unleashed and Deadly. Again, some of these builds haven't been updated in a while, so given the new hybridization, the things that they've made changes to, some of these may not be as optimal as they used to be. He's running two-handed and bow. This is my crafter anyway, so the Stam DK is... I like Stam DK, but it's not my first choice in terms of playstyles. Love them for tanks. For damage, I don't play them as commonly. Okay, so I'm going to leave this one alone. Not much to do here. He's maxed out on everything pretty much. Okay. Still doing the GTA blocking. Okay, so let me switch over. Still not sure how I feel about the account-wide achievements. I know there were definitely some that I went for the whatever it was as far as the RP portion of my character wants this title, so I would do certain things for that character. Now, of course, those achievements are going to span across all of your characters. It does become difficult to track. There were a number of times that I would go in. It became kind of a motivation to go in and play certain dungeons or do certain things because I hadn't achieved that particular title or whatever it was on the character. Now there's really no need to do that because essentially it's going to be spread account wide, but a lot of it was just for the titles, so in some ways this saves time running the same dungeons over and over on different characters. And on these accounts, like I said, this is pre-armory, so 18 characters, maxed out, and you've got 3 per class. So in terms of achievements, I kind of gave up a long time ago on trying to get max out achievements on every character. There's really no way. I don't have that kind of time. So one of the disadvantages to having tons of alt characters, unless you're just playing non-stop, you're never really going to get you're never going to get all the achievements on everything. Alright, so... Yeesh. Busy today. I guess I just read that Update 33 ended up being a hardware issue, but so it was unrelated to the actual software patch itself, but rough go for the first couple of days, so glad they got it sorted out. Most of, separate topic, most of the builds that I've got over here, they're things that I created myself. Very, very few of the things that I run are based on somebody else's ideas. My playstyle is a little bit different from some of the other people that I have seen in terms of videos and people producing builds. I'm I've hit a few trials over the years, but for the most part, I have not touched trials. So only my latest characters have any type of trial gear. So the bulk of my builds won't have anything to do with trials at all. There's no trial gear. And I'm a big fan of craftable. So even though you'll see a lot of the bigger build producers that come out with things, Outcast has been around for years, is one of the go-to, I know, for a lot of people. But what I found personally going through those kind of builds, especially if you're talking about someone who runs trials, so they're doing high-end, end-game, difficult content, to me, personally, the builds end up being very, very generic, very boring. In Mother of Sorrow was the top of the list for how many years, and in some cases still is, especially with the hybridization. And I like kind of a combination of fun, visuals. Obviously, cosmetics wouldn't be a thing to sell if people didn't enjoy cosmetics, so I enjoy the cosmetics. I enjoy the lighting effects. I enjoy seeing my character do things that look impressive. So there's at least a certain factor. I don't go purely for looks, but there's a balance, at least with the builds that I do, where I find something that gives me decent, above average damage output, but also comes with some fun factor typically. Even if it comes at the expense of, well, I can get 1,000, 1,500 more DPS out of this setup, I'll go with the fun factor before I'll go with that extra little edge, because for the content that I tend to run and the people that I typically run with, I don't need maxed out super high profile stuff. So most of what you see in here as I'm going over things, it's just my own builds. It's things that they're things that I put together. I dummy test in terms of going in for comparison testing. I don't do parsing for speed or, for example, I don't use the trial dummy for parsing at all. Because I don't do trials, so it's that's not the content I run. So anybody that's using the trial dummy that doesn't run trials, you're being greatly misled, in case that's not obvious. They transitioned from when the initial dummies were released. They had a 3 mil, and then I think a 6 mil came out shortly after that. And then, well after that, they released the trial dummies. The trial dummies add a huge amount of buffs, debuffs, etc. to your overall parse, things that they expect you to be getting when you're in a trial with 11 other people. I'm not sure that some of the people, when they're testing, realize that. They just figure this is awesome because look at my DPS. So normally I will test on a 3 mil for quick testing and a 6 mil for more extensive testing, but I don't use the trial dummies at all because I don't really do trials. So I'll use the 3 mil or the 6 mil essentially to compare as I step through my rotation, and I'll use that to compare and get an idea, okay, these sets are better than this in terms of overall output, and then adjust skills and rotation, etc., etc. So it's there's some I definitely test, but it's less about the high-end maximum output and more just for the comparison of, okay, this is better than this is worse, just to get an idea of what sets I work well together and what sets I can wear. So this is a MagDK setup. Looks like I'm running Ma the Infernal, because why not? That's fun. New Moon and Burning Spellweave for a MagDK. It's a nice setup, and then Inferno Staff, Maelstrom's Inferno on the back. New Moon is one of my go-to for builds. It has been ever since it was released. Even after they nerfed it, I continued to use it because I think it's just a solid set. I tend to not be a fan of gimmicky sets. I've run sets like that before, but generally speaking, I don't do as well with them because they're they're based on every 3 seconds do this or that, whatever it may be, and it just becomes one more thing I've got to think about while I'm in combat. So I tend to prefer New Moon or other sets that just kind of give flat stat bonuses that are there all the time and don't require gimmicks in order to gain additional effects or buffs. So New Moon is still a very, very solid set if you're just looking for a base game set, so that's one of the reasons why I use it. So you'll see New Moon in a lot of my builds as kind of, that's my base set, and then generally speaking I'll look for a secondary set that is both good for damage but also comes with a fun factor or a visual effect or something like that, is generally how I do my builds. New Moon Inferno Staff, Nirnhoned. So nothing too fancy here. I don't think there's anything really that would need to be updated. Bellweave is now being used on both mag and stamp characters, which is weird. But I get it with the hybridization stuff that they're doing. Zogvins and Kinraz, these kind of sets are now kind of across both stam and mag. But this is still a pretty it's a good setup, even though it was originally based on the Magicka side of things. It's solid, so shouldn't need to update anything there. The Firebug. And we're getting, our titles are filling out here, so let's hop on the next one. Yeah, I'm a big fan of New Moon, and of course once you gold out items, weapons, armor, that kind of thing, it tends to be, I don't tend to get rid of anything like that. I don't think I've ever deconned a gold item. So once it's in the bank, it becomes something that you can fall back on. And they do occasionally come back around. I've still got, well, they've probably done it on more than one set, but I'm trying to think of, there was one set in particular that was a very solid set. This is from a couple years back now, that I was using across a lot of my builds at the time. This was prior to New Moon's being New Moon Acolyte being released, and they completely gutted the set, much to the dismay of a lot of the people that were using it at the time. So things like that, where you've just got gold weapons, gold armor sitting around in the bank. Occasionally they make changes like that and then come back around a year or two later and it gets buffed or reinvigorated somehow, which is kind of fun, because then you end up kind of going back through your bank and saying, oh, hey, look at this, I've got these particular set items from years ago that I haven't touched. They've just been sitting gathering dust. And so you can create new builds using those items, which kind of reinvigorates whatever set it is. And Hero of the Ebonheart Pact, right? Aerostorm Scout. Oh, is this something? Okay, so this is, I'm assuming, related to the account-wide achievements. I don't know. It seems a little hokey in some ways, because this character didn't earn it. But I know a lot of people have been asking for account-wide achievements for years now, so I'm sure they're happy. So, let's see, the current setup. This is my DK tank. Running Leeching. Probably my favorite tanking set. Powerful Assault. Okay, so Sword and Board on the front and back. Leeching. Wait, we got a trainee piece here. So Lady Thorn. giving you health. And then this is doing major maim. This is a solid set. I like this setup. I don't know that I would continue running it. I'm trying to remember what I think. Yeah, my other tank is running in Kratos Behemoth. But this is a solid alternative for tanks. Despite all the changes they've made recently, this is still a solid setup. And it gives you health, which for a tank, most tanks, that's a good thing, because health-based heals especially, just general survivability, health is always going to be a good stat for tanks. Within reason. I do like higher health tanks. I've always preferred higher health tanks. I've seen some people go just absolutely nuts though, where it's nothing but health, and they're using the either vampire or the necro ulti, which boosts those stats even more. But I haven't found that. That's my original tanks years and years ago. My original starting tank, I think, in fact, was a Templar. It was a Blazing Shield Templar. And their shield strength, I believe at the time, maybe it still is, was based off of health as well. So it was a really, really solid setup from survivability, but the caveat being I started with that thinking, yeah, this is a great tank, until you start getting hammered and are attempting to block, and then when you run out of stamina very quickly because you have no points into stamina or no way of getting stamina back, you realize it doesn't matter how much health I have, if they can just bleed it down, and I can't block, I'm just sitting here taking damage. So over the years you realize that even with tanks there needs to be a balance between your stats, so it can't all be health. There still needs to be enough resources left in your other pools, stamina especially for blocking. So this is a fairly typical setup. You see here I've got 17 mag, 47 health, and then 23 for the stam. She has food on right now. Bewitched Sugar Skulls is a great food choice for tanks. Anybody looking, you can pick these up. You either buy the recipe and make it yourself, or you can pick these up in the guild traders, stacks of them, fairly cheap. It's well worth it in terms of tanking, because the stats are very, very solid, very good stats. So leeching is fine. Again, leeching is a go-to for me. I prefer a balance between survivability and utility that I'm bringing to the group, and leeching really, really does that for me. So the bulk of my tanks are going to be running leeching as the kind of base set, and then some sort of secondary set, again, for that fun factor or visual effect or something that, and ultimately, hopefully, contributes to the group, is my goal. So leeching for tanks is the equivalent of New Moon for my damage dealers. Kind of how I've played it over the years. And leeching has I don't think this has ever been nerfed. It's only been buffed over the years, so it's only gotten better over the years. So this is a solid set. Lady Thorn is definitely group utility, although it does give the tank health. And then Powerful Assault. This particular setup, it's good for group utility. The Powerful Assault, when you're on the back bar, is going to give your group the additional weapon and spell damage, which is definitely a nice buff. And in this particular setup, I've got back bar, I've got Echoing Vigor. Is Warhorn on there as well? Yeah, it is. So either one of these, basically, when you fire these off, it will activate the Powerful Assault. So generally speaking, I've got Echoing Vigor, which is going to give a group heal out, an AoE heal, and then every time that gets activated, see my weapons. Oh wait, is this in combat? Did they? Another one they changed. While in combat, yeah, so it's not going to activate now. But basically I'm giving the group additional damage. So this is a decent setup. I know a lot of the endgame trial guys are running a frost staff of powerful assault on the back. The frost staffs were going for multiple millions. It just seems ridiculous to me. Generally speaking, that's another thing that my builds take into consideration, is I'm not going to go in and spend millions, because I don't have millions. Generally a solo player. I do play occasionally with family and friends, but the money factor, I don't belong to any guild traders or anything like that, so all of the money is just stuff that I earn directly, so I don't necessarily have the millions to spend on it, which is another reason why I really like the craftable gear, or things that I can get like this where you're running through dungeons and it's just a result of running content. But in this case, it looks like I'm running powerful assault on the back bar, leeching on the front.
Dumping said refuse on the head of the Ultimate Commander for ruin during
Let's see here.
And finally, knocking over the cart of Atreus the merchant while attempting to avoid capture. For all of these crimes.
Interesting. Okay, so for some reason I've got 5 leeching here, and then I've got the shield here. This is not would not be my recommendation, because there's no need to have the additional piece here. My guess is that when I did this, this is a trainee piece, so it's trainee is a great one piece. You're getting quite a bit out of that, so I definitely recommend, if you have an open slot, trainee is a great option to fill the slot with, because you're proportional to other one-piece bonuses. You're getting more bang for your buck. I'm guessing I did this purely because this particular shield, in case you don't know, this is the shield that drops as a reward from the first time you've completed Imperial City Prison, and the shield actually is Lord Warden is actually trapped in the shield, so when you activate the shield by pulling it out, he talks to you periodically as you pull it out. So it's more of an entertainment factor. You don't need 6 pieces at all. I've got 5 pieces on the body, and then powerful assault on the back. So essentially leeching is active all the time, front and back, which is good in terms of the survivability. It's going to do that poison damage and give you the healing constantly that way. So this was purely for fun. Okay, so we'll come back to this. I think I want to redo this just because powerful assault, while useful, and it's not too gimmicky because it's basically just one heal in combat, which I'm going to be doing anyway, so I'm already activating this throughout the fights. So it's easy to proc. I think that's one of the reasons why the trial guys run it. It's also an unnamed buff, so it doesn't get canceled out. It'll stack with other named buffs. But let's come back. See what else we've got in here. For tanking, Baraha's Curse is another decent option if you're looking for that kind of a scaling heal that comes from the more mobs, more groups hitting you, the more potential healing you've got. The main reason why I prefer leeching over Barahas is, for a lot of my tanks, it's either stamina focused purely, or it's at least the majority of it is stamina. And the biggest reason is because leeching activates on taking damage versus doing damage. Barahas requires that you actually do damage, and for a lot of the tanks, you're skills and various things that you're firing aren't necessarily about doing damage. A lot of them are just utility. And because you're not... As a tank, you're taking damage constantly. So activating leeching is much, much easier than activating Barajas, because you're not dealing damage constantly as a tank. Your focus is more on staying alive and providing utility to your group. So Barajas sounds good on paper, and if you have a different approach to tanking, there are some people I know in the past that have run mag builds where it's primarily, it's almost like a damage dealing build, heavy on shielding or this kind of things, where they're dishing out a lot of damage and shields or protective things for the group, but damage is a major component of what they're doing. And in those instances, Barajas is probably a good choice, because you've got good healing and it's going to be active a lot because they're doing damage regularly. Like a Sork tank, for example. You got pets that are doing damage or that kind of thing. I have no idea what this one's running. New Moon, okay, so not surprising. And then Overwhelming and Alambris. Nerdhound Lightning and a Maelstrom Infused Lightning on the back. Okay, so this is probably still a solid setup as well. I don't want the word to get out too broadly, because this set has been a fantastic set for several years now, and in fact it got buffed a year or two ago, somewhere in there. It actually got buffed even more so, but Overwhelming for Sorks and for Templars, Mag Sorks and Magplars specifically. I want to say Magicka Necros too, Mag Necro. This set outperformed the bulk of other sets that I tried. And the beauty of this set is not only does it outperform in terms of damage, the sustain that you get from this set, it doesn't look like a lot when you read the tooltip, but the sustain that you get from this set is fantastic. It's not like what is the trial set that they added? All God's Devotion. It's not to that extent, but this is enough that it's significant in that it keeps you in the game without having to, if you're someone like me who doesn't like to constantly chug potions, that's another thing that's different in my gameplay, is I'm not a potion chugger. I'll use them when I need them, when I'm low on resources or when I'm low on health, but again, for cost reasons, I don't want to just sit there and eat through potions every 45 seconds. I know the end game people laugh at that and think that's such a detriment to your gameplay, but it's not required to get through the content. Burning through your potions is only required in order to get through content more quickly, because ultimately it's, if your survivability is there, all it's really doing is contributing to you gaining more recovery, which is allowing you to focus more on damage or put out more damage more quickly. So for us, it's never been about the speed runs, it's never been about maximum damage, it's about getting through the content. That's kind of how I play. So dungeons, the harder content specifically, in fact, I find, maybe this is the wrong perspective, but it's kind of how I look at it. Our groups are actually better equipped to deal with the content than the people that are running endgame trial and running that type of gear, that are just burning through mobs and bosses. The reason being is, yes, they can put out more damage, yes, they can burn through the content, but then you're not actually addressing mechanics, because you're only engaging part or maybe not even any of the mechanics, so you're never really dealing with difficulty. It's difficult in the sense that, yes, you have to burn through this boss, but you're never having to actually stop and deal with the mechanics of the game. And for someone that doesn't have the ability to burn through, you have to deal with those mechanics. So I think it teaches you to actually be a better player, because you can't just burn through. So the lesson here is, the more you suck, the better the player you must be. You heard it here first. Anyway, overwhelming, great set, underrated. It's still kind of under the radar. That's great. I don't mind that, because it's something that I've enjoyed running over the years. Great for sustain, great for damage. Again, it doesn't look it on paper, but test it out on a dummy using some other base set, and it performs very, very well. So lightning, just because it's a Sork, so that all makes sense. Maelstrom, Alambris. I like Alambris again. There's that kind of visual effect, as well as being decent for damage. And they brought back I believe they brought that back, the ability to have both of these at once. I believe that's working again. So this is still fine. I don't think there's anything that I want to update on this right now. Alright, Orc Stamsork. Oldie but a goodie. Alright, Orc Stamsork. That's me talking to myself in the background. Quiet, you. I realize this isn't the most riveting of gameplay here, but I was going to go through and kind of run through each of these characters anyway, and I figured it's a good excuse to hop on and share a little more about me and the game, and some of the stuff that I do within the game and how I play and make builds and stuff. So okay, we got New Moon, Essence Thief. Okay. I remember this. So this is my Stamsork Werewolf build. I don't think anything has changed significantly in terms of the sets that I'm running. If you're running Werewolf and you're newer to the game and you're looking for a way to buff your damage as a werewolf, and it's a damage type build, not a tanking type build, I don't think there's a better set out there than Molag Kina. This is a kind of a goofy set in terms of trying to use it for standard damage dealers. This is one of those examples of a gimmicky type set, because you're 2 consecutive light attacks. So you'd think that this would be easy to trigger, but after playing the game for a number of years and getting used to light attack weaving, where you're basically doing a light attack in between each skill fire, this is actually harder to activate than you might imagine, because it becomes just muscle memory. Light attack, weave, light attack, weave, light attack, weave. So it does feel gimmicky on a standard damage dealer. However, on a werewolf, the bulk of your attacks are light attacks. So this is actually extremely easy and feels very natural to trigger on a werewolf. And the damage output that you get from this, the increased damage that you get from this, is significant. Not only because of that one piece where you're gaining the weapon and spell damage, but then you're getting the additional 541 on top of that. The increased ability cost as a werewolf you do need to be aware of, but like I said, the bulk of your attacks are going to be light attacks, and so this is easily sustainable, and the amount of damage increase that you see from it is significant. So if you're running werewolf damage dealing, highly recommend getting a hold of Moleg Kina. This comes from White Gold Tower Vet, or you can pick it up on from the Golden Vendor on weekends. Depending on, obviously that's random, so if it happens to be available there, you can pick it up that way too. New Moon is the base set, and then Essence Thief. This is another. This is actually another set that comes from White Gold Tower, so you can farm both at the same time. This is. I think that this is another one of those sets that's been kind of getting buffed a little bit over time, so it's actually gotten even better. I mean, you can see from the description here, but this is another thing that's really easy to proc in werewolf form. Dealing damage with a light or heavy attack, draws essence from the enemy that pools, and then you're gaining healing and stamina from this, plus a 10% increase to your damage. So again, for werewolves, easy to proc because you're already doing light attacks on a regular basis, and that additional health, even though it doesn't look like a huge amount, that's enough as a damage dealer werewolf, going through most of the content, even vet content, is enough to sustain you from a healing standpoint. I've run werewolves in the past with leeching, is another really great option for a werewolf for healing. It makes it extremely survivable. Pretty much you're going to be unkillable except for something like PvP where you're playing against other players. I would go with a different setup for that. But for PvE content, running leeching on a werewolf is a fantastically survivable setup. But what I wanted to do for this particular one was I wanted a high damage werewolf. And my testing over the years, I ended up with this weird where I would always have to sacrifice something, because werewolf has that very peculiar setup in their skills where the bulk of their skills are stamina, except for your heal, which is magicka, and then they changed it a few years back to where your heal was based off of your max health. There's another change, which is a good change, it helps, but it becomes difficult to try to find a balance when you're building out a werewolf build where you want to be in werewolf form and maintain that, to balance between health, magicka, and stamina. Because you want all three, because you need a decent magicka pool in order to be able to fire this, to be able to heal yourself. You need a decent health pool to get a strong heal, and you need a decent stamina pool in order to use the bulk of your other skills, blocking, dodge rolling, etc. And so it was always this weird hybridization where nothing was really great and it was all kind of compromised. But this particular setup I found was a good balance. It allowed me to wear Kina for the damage, and then New Moon just brings in just solid base game damage. Again, no gimmicks here. And I'm running the big pieces. I'm running Tristat enchants to kind of fill out those other pools. On the head too, on the Kina. And then the little pieces I'm doing stamina, I believe, on everything, yeah. But Essence Thief brings in the one thing that I ran into on the original damage dealing werewolves is their survivability. The healing just wasn't great because I couldn't get enough of a heal out of my werewolf heal. Piercing's Rage. It wasn't either giving me a strong enough heal or I would run out of magicka, something to that effect. So, believe it or not, the Essence Thief, every 10 seconds, that extra 4,200 health, plus the stamina, which is again great for stamina builds, great for werewolf, was enough to offset the healing, enough to bring enough healing to the game that I was able to survive. And it's not too sketchy. It's not like I'm on the cusp of dying every time. It's enough that it gives you a balanced feel to it, to where you don't feel like you're constantly going to die. While at the same time bringing in the stamina plus the 10% extra damage. It's a really, really solid setup. It does have the randomness of where it will spawn as far as the pool when you need to get to it, but most of the time that's a decent. It's in a location it's okay to get to. Every once in a while I'll have it spawn off of a bridge or someplace weird where you don't have immediate access to it. But it's a very nice balance, and this is good both in human form as well as werewolf form. I'm still running a bow of agility on the back bar on this one. This actually should be a maelstrom bow here. Probably would definitely be preferred. Agility is a nice alternative if you don't have the maelstrom weapons yet. So this was an earlier build, clearly, because I'm still running agility on it. So New Moon Maul, this gives extra penetration in both human and werewolf form. And then Kina for the damage, New Moon for the damage, and then of course Essence Thief is bringing 10% more damage plus the resources. So yeah, this was a fun build. I haven't played it for a while, but it's definitely a fun build. And the sustain, from what I recall, sustain in this, the general stats were good both in human and in werewolf form. This only gets stronger in werewolf because you gain more stamina. Yeah, so just with that 5868, if it still activates. Oh, did they fix that? Apparently they finally fixed that. You used to be able to just you used to be able to trigger this just by sitting here and light attacking in the air. It looks like they finally fixed that. So it doesn't activate, but yeah, solid damage output. And good sustain and survivability too. So I think I'm going to leave that alone. I might have to actually split this here. It's taken a while to get through. You guys are getting first insight into all my builds. Not too over the top creative, but it works well for my playstyle. Okay, so this is another Stamsork. I believe I created this. Normally I would have kind of a Magicka setup and a Stamina setup and a tanking setup. Sorcerer is actually one of the few classes that I haven't tanked on. I'm trying to think if the other account has a Sorc tank. Alright, I'm gonna move because she's gonna talk your ear off. Good old raw caw. Oh, this is a problem. Because I don't have a crafting bag on. Let's see. So because I don't have a tanking setup for this. I already went over Magsork. And I believe the reason why I created a third one was in the event that I wanted to create a tank, then I could just kind of shift over the build to a tanking setup. So I still have 3. But I also really enjoyed the werewolf build specifically and didn't want to alter that at the time. Again, this is pre-armory. Now I can easily swap between, but for the purpose at the time I wanted to keep that build intact, but I wanted another Stamsork build just to try out different things. So over here we're running Stormfist, which after recent buffs, this is one of the strongest Stam monster helms in the game. So that's going to be a solid option. Plus it's Stormfist on a Sork. Who doesn't like Stormfist on a Sork? Thematically it's cool. Night Mother. Oh, okay. I remember this. So Night Mother way back in the day, for those that have been around a while, you remember this, but for the newer players, this used to be an unnamed buff, and when they started coming out with the named buffs, major and minor buffs, this got updated. This was a big, highly used set on at least one of the players in Trials, because they used to reduce enemy resistance, and it was an unnamed buff at the time. And then they switched this over to where it became Major Fracture, which eventually became Major Breach when it combined. And so as a named buff, this became less useful for the endgame players because there were other ways to get Major Breach rather than dedicating a whole set to this. But if you're soloing, like I am a lot, or you're in a group that doesn't necessarily, well, I would say doesn't necessarily have access to Major Breach, but that's not realistic nowadays. If you're in a group with a tank, you have access to Major Breach, so it's unlikely to be as useful in a group. But I believe when I was running this was definitely more of a solo setup, so this works really, really well if you're doing a lot of solo content, because it's easy way to gain Major Breach as a damage dealer. And the beauty of this is when it's combined, when you deal critical damage, you apply Major Breach, so you're reducing the resistance by almost 6,000. It's got crit plus the spell damage and weapon damage. And when you combine that with the Ravager set, I believe I had pieces of this in my bank. This was an example of a set that I had used prior, and I don't know that it necessarily got nerfed, but I stopped using it for whatever the reason, and I was looking for an excuse to come up with a build for it. And so this is kind of what I came up with. So every time you attempt to reduce the target's physical and spell resistance, which you naturally are going to do every time you crit with this set, Night Mother's Gaze, you gain a stack of Ravager for 5 seconds, increasing weapon and spell damage by 146. So there's a cooldown on this. Not gonna make a claim that this is the maximum damage output or anything, but this is a setup that allows you to essentially just attack. It's fairly brainless, and it's just going to build up damage as you go. Essentially, you can just go fight things. It's a fun setup. The Ravager set itself has kind of a cool visual effect. It's like mixed lightning, which again I thought was fun for the Sork theme, and we have an infused Maelstrom bow on the back for this one. This is using a dagger and an axe, Nirnhone and infused. Yeah, so this is, you can see these pieces were pulled from the bank just because at the point that I was using this was probably the optimal setup. An infused axe and a Nirnhone dagger. it's been a few years since that's been optimal. This may have even been before. I think this was before they reduced. Dual wield used to output max damage for the enchants. The enchants were the same as they were for two-handed weapons on both items. And then maybe like 3 years ago or more, they reduced one-handed weapons. Basically, the enchant was half of what it used to be. So this is a leftover from that era. But they were already gold, and I didn't feel like transmuting them, so I just left them as is. This is definitely more of a fun build. Easy build to play. Just go out and whack things. So this potentially could get an update. It could turn into a tank build, but again, there's no need to do that now that we have the armory, because I can pull any of the builds, any of the existing characters, and add a tank build to it. Moving on. So we did Mag Sork and then 2 Stam Sorks. So that should cover Sork. Oh wow, we're only a third of the way through here. I'm gonna cut here just so the videos don't get too long, and then come back and we'll resume with the next character. So I will be right back.